for me to watch. Just imagine me knowing pretty much from March, April of 24 that Joe Biden wasn't going to get in office, that his party was not going to get in office again.
Mm.
So even when they stabbed him in the back, and I do look at it that way,
Yeah.
even when they stabbed him in the back and they think, okay, Kamala, you go forward now,
Yeah.
right? Even when that happened, imagine how I felt, where we see that Kamala raised $1 billion and we saw, you know, the Greeks strutting, right?
Yeah.
And that was interesting for me to watch because I think there's been this challenge of our relevance in in black life, even though we
Mm.
were once a bedrock related to it.
Mm.
But we were kind of going like, well, yeah, now our time has come. And I was like, I wonder how this if this all falls out the way I think it will, what will become the thoughts related to our time? And what I've come to where I've landed is that we really have to rethink how we've envisioned this talented tenth that
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Du Bois talked about,
Yeah.
and some of the ideas that were put forth from the 20th century that we've kind of pushed along. This is not to say we abandon them wholly, but I might have said on your show last time, forgive me if I didn't, that I think it might be time to also pay attention to Booker T.
Yes.
Booker T. Washington, we largely dismissed his kind of call, like, well, let's focus on economics. We're like, no, 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 we're gonna go for civil rights. We're gonna go for this, and we did that. And the Boule, the Greek letter organizations, Jack and Jill, all come from this promulgation that we will ascend the best, the cream of the crop of our people, and we will put them forth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Morehouse men, Spellman women, all these other things. Now, I'm not dismissing them or saying like they're not important. They aren't what we think they are or what they think they are. We are going to have to build more of a mass movement
Mm-hmm.
that isn't just related to like the creme de la creme. Like, of course, among the better educated,
Yeah.
may be successful, but if we're not leveraging that wealth, if we're not leveraging that expertise related to our advancement rather than thinking like our time has come, we have to be bolder. I think I'm sure I said because I've said it on other shows. We sometimes have this mentality like, well, we just want a seat at the table. Even as I watched Captain America, that movie that came out, made me a little sick. Um, Even as that I watched that movie, just hold this idea, but let me just want a seat at the table. Fuck that.
Yeah.
I want the table. And
That's
I
right.
think at this point, it's not even just about like, well, we need to make our own table. That's not going to work because they're going to move and come to our
Mm-hmm.
table once it's kind of like, fabulous. So what's going to work is like, you know what? Not only am I going to have my table, we're going to have your table, and then we're going to show you how tables should be built and be inclusive, you know, and we have to be that bold
Mm-hmm. Wow.
rather than like, let's just kind of inch our way in.
Hey, look, we just happy to be there too often, Sam. That's our biggest problem, man. We just too happy to be that token black person. And man, hearing that of boldness, all of those things, we see that from white supremacists. We see that from Donald Trump. DEI has been this main buzzword talking point, of course, now. And as we know, white women benefit the most from that, but we have black people who are afraid of losing those benefits, things like that. How can we utilize astrology to start creating our own tables? Because Sam, from every movie that I watched as a kid, there's always that weird sorcerer who's in the background who's telling the main character, "Okay, it's a prophecy, it's your time," things like that. So, how can we use astrology for times like this when it is time to start building our own tables?
I think we have to kind of come to change the narrative. Right now, even though I said it's the storm has rolled in.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think we have to start thinking about how to prepare. So, like I mentioned, the Venus retrograde, that usually comes with
hmm
some cycle of injustice that
yeah,
surfaces during this particular time.
hmm
So, we have to think about what do we want? And that's probably the harder thing for us in terms of what we want in this country. Like, well, we want justice. Well, when we start, in some examples of this Venus retrograde
Mm-hmm.
idea. So when Venus went retrograde in 2012 in Gemini, um, one of the things we saw and observed was kind of this awakening related to Trayvon Martin and his murder. In 2020, 8 years later, because they come in 8 year cycles related to particular signs, 8 years later, we were dealing with George Floyd
Oh, jeez.
and also Ahmaud Arbery,
Yep. Yep.
right? So we have to kind of think about, well, what do we want and how are we going to get it? And I think that requires more strategizing. You're like, well, we did, we have Black Lives Matter. Yes, we did. But I think the real question, like, I'll just be very direct and transparent.
Mm-hmm.
I think the phraseology defund the police wasn't one really conveying what we were saying. We're not talking about getting rid of all police, even though, yeah, there was a segment of our population that definitely was like all police.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we were talking about is like, let's not prioritize the police in our community. One, two, let's not prioritize the police as first responders for every damn thing. Let's talk about how we can really foster more sense of community and accountability related to the police. I actually think we should make the police and policing a key priority, um, moving forward, with all this energy moving into Aries, because understand, this is something I've been saying since Pluto was in Capricorn, moving into Pluto in Aquarius. Law enforcement is about to go next level in terms of how they work with us. And I shouldn't say work with us, I will say work us over.
Wow.
And you're like, well, why do you think that? How do you know? Some measure of it is conditioned by what we could see the last time Pluto was in Capricorn going to Aquarius, which is, who were we fighting? The Redcoats, who really acted as the police for the king, or we could say the state.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, we're seeing similar kind of expansion of their powers and how they're operating in our communities. And so we have even ceased to function related to the control of the police or how we look after ourselves. We give confusing messages where we also start spilling out like, well, hire more black police officers, which doesn't mean shit,
Yep.
because you could be beaten, harassed, killed by a black police officer just as easily as a white one. That's not, because it's the nature of the culture. When I say the
Mm-hmm.
culture, I mean the culture of policing. So that's one other particular thing. You're like, well, why are you focused on that? Because the police actually, they've morphed. They have evolved, since our encounter with them in the 60s. And we haven't necessarily. So that whole thing about having a permit for any kind of gathering wasn't necessarily as uniformly strict, and kept, during the civil rights era. It is now, and coupled with other things, there's much more surveillance than
Yeah.
ever before, which goes along with, Pluto and Aquarius. I mean, this is kind of on some level why even people are pressing more for AI.
Mm.
So I think we're going to have to get smarter, plan differently,
Yeah.
strategically, and be clear on what we want. And
Mm.
I think what we're pressing for, and we should press for in the broader sense, is more localized control. Um, and when I say localized control, I mean, you notice that there's been this consolidation across the country for everything, either trying to federalize it or centralize it related to the mayor or related to the powers in office.
Mm-hmm.
We went from having a board of education in most places to departments of education.
Mm.
And you're like, well, what's the difference? Who cares? Well, the Board of Education, you had to elect someone from your community um, to represent you to be on that board. And you had a lot more localized control. With Department of Education, most things are appointed. Your police officers and your head of police are selected by a mayor and pretty much only answer to the mayor, maybe occasionally a council,
Wow.
a common council, but they don't have to answer to anything related to the people at all. So when we as we kind of divest more, and notice the parallel I said related to 1781 with the nature of the Constitution. The initial idea of this Constitution, the United States Constitution, was more about localized rights. States were smaller, and so they were conceived as having more sovereignty related to their own people, and then even localized related to their counties, which is why we still have counties, and why we also have counties, and we have even this anachronism, which we don't recognize as an anachronism, as sheriffs. Sheriffs are the vestiges of a concept of policing from England. And why that's important, especially with you being, I imagine, in DeKalb County, is that the sheriff at least was duly elected. And by virtue of that, had some responsibility and accountability to the people.
Yeah.
Notice that in modern policing, urban policing, that doesn't exist. So, I mean, it creates the, like, well, the county has, the county sheriff has more power than technically. Yeah, depending on your county, all three of them and their two deputies, the sheriff and the two deputies, they're smaller.
Mm.
So they can't operate at the same level as they can't even operate at the same level as some schools. No, if Morehouse, I mean, I don't know this to be true, but if Morehouse has another campus, another part of Georgia, their campus police has more jurisdiction than the county police or even city police. But we're still
Wow.
dealing with the police. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure it's true for the University of Georgia.
Yeah.
So I'm picking on, I've done a lot of research related to police and policing. And I just think they're going to be, because we can't even have complete adequate protests without tools that disarm or reduce the power of police.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of one thing, just to answer your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Sam. That was a great breakdown. From seeing Trump, he has been always taking headlines with the news. His inauguration was insane from seeing Elon Musk up there, Zuckerberg, we see Bezos, and it's like oligarchy. That's what I thought instantly, where it's just open. Of course, we already knew about the Rockefellers, JP Morgans, but we've never seen it this up front. Elon Musk is in the Oval Office standing up.
Well, I'm going to give
How do you
JP
feel about that?
Morgan, yeah, I'm going to give them different
Yeah,
credit. So this is true for
yeah,
Carnegie.
yeah.
They had a completely different mindset in the 20th
Mm-hmm.
century than what we can see with the 21st oligarchs. Are they
Mm-hmm.
both white oligarchs or of the same group?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely
Mm-hmm.
true. But the mindset of a JP Morgan, the mindset of Andrew Carnegie
Mm-hmm.
was to create institutions as a way of helping to advance a society. Whether we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about with Carnegie libraries, whether we're talking about schools,
Yep.
so I'm not romanticizing them. Of course, they had an
Mm-hmm.
agenda. That's
Yeah.
completely different from what we see with Musk, and their their interest in infrastructure is singularly really consolidating their power. So, for instance, let's talk about this blackout for tomorrow, for the 28th.
Yep. Yep.
I've been criticized on my page, my Facebook page, and other places like, you're Debbie Downer and you're really kind of, taking away the fact that people are making small steps for challenging the system. I am not doing that to individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But just to put things in perspective for people, You not buying anything from Amazon, as and I know there are other targets, I mean including Target and Walmart and others, but you not buying from Amazon for that one day isn't
Mm.
gonna hurt Amazon. You're like, no, it's not just gonna be for one day, Sam. It's also gonna be maybe for 3 days and it's gonna go on. Okay, let's look at this closer. Amazon has set up a software system called AWS, which it works for multiple websites and businesses throughout the world. By virtue of licensing this software, by which it, ties in all elements related to the web, same thing through Oracle, it makes more money from doing that than the retail we think we're spending related to Amazon. That's a very important point to understand because it brings home like you're dealing with a behemoth, a hydra
Right.
on a scale that you think, well, I'm going to show these billionaires our power. They're like, I, I don't care. Like, okay, you're going to hurt some measure of this bottom line, but the other part of it, like you going on, let me check this site. Oh, Molly's perfumes that you kind of purchased your perfumes from in, let me see, in Macon, Georgia, right?
Mm.
I own that site, meaning I have, she licenses, whether she knows it or not, Molly, whether she knows it or not, she's licensing my software to be able to have your $50 Burberry purchase.
Mm.
And we're like, oh, well, we're going to show the power. We're going to have to go back, study our history. I'm reading this very I would say um powerful biography of Dr. King. It annoys me. It's written by a white journalist.
Mhm.
Um, and you're like, well, he shouldn't be that annoyed, but okay. But it's not one of us, and it's the same thing I had with David Garrow's book. But this is supposed to be one of the you know, final words on Dr. King's life. And I think, one, studying about his life and knowing his astrology, but it's reviewing for me also the organization and the conduct, the study, the preparation during the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
And we may have to go old school. And when we have all this happening in Aries, Saturn in Aries, Uranus moving into Gemini. By the way, every time Uranus has gone into Gemini, the United States has been at war.
Wow.
And so that's another thing we probably should also prepare ourselves. Whether it's the Civil War, whether it's the Revolutionary War, World War II, every 83, 84 years, we've been dealing with some measure of war in our 250 plus years of existence. And what I think that means for us um, is that with knowing this history, we should think about what we target, how we target. And it may require more than using the infrastructure of the web
Mm.
as we have come reliant on. A lot of people think like we're going to show them, I'm protesting and I'm, tweeting. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Like, Elon was like, oh, you want to tweet about this? Hold on. 44 billion? Hold.
Yep.
So here's 44 billion. Now I own like the biggest platform that you've been protesting on. So you go ahead. You can talk about me all you want. And oh, is that a blue check mark I see for you? Thank you so much for your service. What are we doing? I think we should be more on the street. I think we should think more about like you don't go to work today. We're sitting in busloads of people, or bringing in busloads of people. Like we're sitting on Wall Street. No one's going to work today. You can't get in.
Yep.
And knowing that that's going to lead to arrests, creating multiple arenas of conflict, so that the police are stretched thin, and they're working on overtime rather than like what Occupy Wall Street. We're going to take over Zuccotti Park, and we're going to have this park, and we're going to show them. It's like you don't know how the police work. They're just going to surround you.
Mhm.
And that's what they did. They surrounded them. And then when they were tired of them, they just kind of went in. encompassed them all about, and then just like took them down.